This video is brought to you by our amazing supporters over at Patreon.
Hey everyone, it's Ben from Board to Bits, and this video is probably going to stray the furthest from actual game development, but I also think it can be the most important to making progress and actually finishing your game. When you first have an idea for a game, the sky is usually the limit. Your mind pictures the best possible version of the game, though interestingly that image usually has some big gaps in it. And the more you think about the game, the more features you can see yourself adding in or embellishing. The problem is that with such a complex game idea, you can find yourself with no idea where to get started, what order to do things in, and with a seemingly insurmountable number of tasks to complete. This is a fast track to an abandoned project. So how do you avoid this all too common fate? Here are a few steps that can at least help you get going. First, make your idea real. That perfect vision in your head is going to be very difficult to achieve. If it is achievable at all, it's going to take a lot of time to do so. So instead, when you first get the idea, ask yourself, what could I realistically accomplish in 48 hours, or maybe 1 week? Think just code and mechanics at this point, not art or UI. It probably won't be anything like your final vision, and that's the point. It's going to give you something more realistic to hit. It might not even really be a prototype, but it just is a place to start. Next, build a list of tasks that lead up to that first checkpoint. Think about everything that you would need to do to reach it. List out the basic mechanics and any other additional code you might need, possibly some utilities you might need to make, or some assets you might need to gather. This gives you a map of where to go. Next, break those tasks into microtasks. Even though you've divided up your game into these things that you need to accomplish, chances are there's still going to have a lot of moving pieces to each of them. For instance, let's say your main character needs an item inventory. You might add item inventory to your task list. But that means that you need items, you need a collection of items for the inventory itself, a means to add, use, and possibly remove items, an item capacity, a means to track against that capacity, so on and so forth. You could spend hours without checking off that item inventory task, and that can be disheartening, even if you don't notice it outright. Instead, take all of those individual parts I just listed and call those microtasks. You can even break those down further if you'd like. It's not necessary to go as far as like line by line of code, but a good rule of thumb would be to be able to complete a task within about 10 to 30 minutes, barring any unexpected challenges. That way, even if you have just a short time to work on your game, you can feel accomplished as you are checking off those boxes. When you're creating these checkpoints, set a deadline, but don't live or die by it. Unless you're working on contract, you're not really beholden to anyone to hit that 48-hour or 1 week mark. That time frame is really more just to keep your vision realistic than it is to keep you on a schedule. If you miss it by a day or two, or even by a week, that's fine, as long as you're making progress, which those microtasks should be proving out. Likewise, if you feel like something in your list is hindering you, consider migrating it to a future task list that you can complete in another checkpoint. Finally, once you've hit your checkpoint, set another. When your task list is all checked off, congratulations, you've completed that first leg that you planned out. It should feel good, and enjoy that, you've earned it. Now it's time to set another checkpoint. You can look another week or maybe 2 down the road now that you have a better idea of how your game is working. You can even work toward having a complete prototype, say, meaning that something that someone could download, start, play, and get a general idea of what your game is about. Create another task list like before and break it down into microtasks and dive in again. For example, here's a task list for the second phase of a game that I'm working on. You can see there's a lot of different kind of tasks, but then they're almost all broken down into smaller things, like dialogue boxes, for example, have triggering dialogue, displaying it on the UI, closing or advancing, kind of using input controls, and pulling in dialogue from another asset somewhere in my game. Really kind of getting it granular. Even then, though, some of these things are still a little bit too big, like more robust item drops. That can mean that there's a lot that's going to go into that, and I need to really break that down. Likewise, some of these things may well be migrated to a future checkpoint rather than this one. As you get further into your project, your game will begin to need assets beyond just the code and temporary art you're working with. Here are a few categories that you can keep in mind for future task lists, so that you can avoid overlooking something and then needing to kind of backfill it later on. Bear in mind, these are all even bigger than just tasks, so don't stop here. Be sure to break these down to tasks and microtasks from there. Some things you might need are obviously main game mechanics, menus, everything from main menus, settings menus, pause menus, ways of handling player input, art from your backgrounds, any characters, UI, sound effects and music, You need to figure out behaviors when your game starts and ends. This includes both like splash screens when you actually start the program, as well as setting up your game when you initially start a play session. Likewise, any splash screens or reverting to menus when the game is over. You need to obviously handle saving and loading both player data and game data, creating and storing levels, creating and storing and loading enemies, as well as if you have online or multiplayer, handling all those things. Again, all of these categories are way too big, but as you break them down into the relevant tasks and then into microtasks, they become a lot easier to tackle. And eventually, one day, once you complete enough microtasks, you'll have a complete game on your hands. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.